This is Chris Dush, and you're listening to Mission Report. Today, I want to welcome Jordan Pine. She is with Project Greenlight, the anti-human trafficking work that my team and I are doing. We got linked up with Jordan back in 2022. And what I love about Jordan and Project Greenlight is Jordan, your heart and your team's heart for this is so evident that you have built trust among so many different organizations around the state. And you've probably got the most extensive list of people who are actually involved and carrying on that one-on-one basis. The state police, you've partnered with them, the task forces around the Commonwealth. You've even managed to get the Department of Education and the nursing boards to sign off on your training for continuing education units. You are passionate about this, and your passion carries through throughout your team. And by the way, I want to thank you for helping me get the connections there with the state police and others. We were able to get about $1 million to spin up in the Attorney General's office, a team that's dedicated towards anti-human trafficking. You were also involved with Senate Bills 44 and 45, helping us to get those drafted and get those signed into law. So I'm trying to do about every month, I want to have something on human trafficking, keeping it at the forefront. Of course, January is Human Trafficking Month. We hit that kind of hard. But the first three of these podcasts are basically organizations like yours that are actually out there doing the work. As we go on, I want to try and bring on some of the survivors that you and I both know, get them to tell their story. One thing that I really want to have you bring up is something that really struck at me when we first met, and you were talking about your trip to Thessaloniki, and I'd like you to go into that because it goes to, I get a lot of people asking me, well, why is this important in Pennsylvania? And if you want to start out with that, I'd greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on. And I mean, as you're listing all of that out in the past 2 years, there has certainly been a lot that has developed. And I know you and your team are doing such incredible work as well in the anti-trafficking front. And we're very grateful. So it's a joy to be able to connect on the podcast today. And yeah, to answer your question, when it came to Thessaloniki, Greece, and the time there and how eye-opening that was, in a way I did not anticipate for the local issue of human trafficking. So I spent a little bit of time in Thessaloniki, Greece, working with an international organization as we work to bring awareness about human trafficking, and we're serving hands-on in their red light district, handing out the National Human Trafficking Hotline number for Greece, and serving in a region that was riddled with human trafficking. In Thessaloniki, because it is a port city, and also because of where it's situated in Europe, it is often one of the top hubs for human trafficking in Europe, as for transportation, as there's the major port that is there. And so you have a lot of trafficking that will come in, get through the Schengen border, which is the border for Europe, and then it just funnels up through. And so we were there and we're thinking, we're doing this great work in Thessaloniki, Greece, and handing out this hotline and the red light district and everything else. And I was paired with a Greek national, and we're walking and we're talking about just our connected passion for ending human trafficking. And he was asking, where we came in from. And so I was sharing, we're from Pennsylvania, and kind of honing in from New York City on. And he said, Pennsylvania. I said, yeah, actually near Harrisburg. I don't know how familiar you are. And he goes, wait a minute, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And he's pausing, he's thinking for a moment, and goes, wait a minute. He said, is that near Carlisle, Pennsylvania? And I remember just being, just struck in that moment of, wow, why are we calling out Carlisle of all places? And he said, "You guys have a really, really terrible human trafficking issue there." And he said, "But the thing is," he said, "I don't think anyone's really doing anything about it." And that was something that struck me many years ago while I was there thinking, hey, here I am doing this great work internationally when it was happening in our own backyard. And at that time, very little was being done to combat it. So that was definitely an eye opening moment that started to fuel the fire even further for what then became Greenlight Operation.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Your passion and what you've brought there, Representative Tom Kutz,
Yeah.
he's been right on this since he's become aware of you and
Yeah.
the training opportunities that he's helped you to do. I got to attend one of those down there. Uh, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do with well, let's start with educators and nurses because
Mhm.
those, again, I mentioned that earlier about the continuing education units, how
Yeah.
important that is, and because first contact, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, three of our main initiatives for Greenlight Operation, as we work to strategically combat human trafficking and serve survivors, we do work in education, legislative advocacy, and then the restoration home. And I know we'll dive into all of that a little bit more. But for us, education is a very, very vital first step in combating human trafficking because we're dealing with an issue that often has not been talked about, and for far too long, it has just thrived in silence. And so, we don't want to just raise the bells and the alarms and say it's happening, but we also want to equip people in their various workplaces as well as even in their roles within, their communities and in their families, and being able to understand the signs to look for and feeling equipped and empowered enough to speak up about it and to help make a difference. And so we see education directly linked to reporting and survivors feeling like they are seen and have opportunity for care as well. And so as we started to note this, education has always been a major part of what we do, but we also wanted to ensure that people knew that this was coming from an evidence-based background, as well as we're providing current, relevant, and research-backed curriculum. And so we went through the process of getting our Curriculum Act 48 certified. So essentially, it serves then as an incentive for one of a very key demographic for us to train being teachers, as they are working with students day in and day out. And so it incentivizes them because if they take our human trafficking course, they are getting credit towards their ongoing educational credit needs that they have every single year for their licensing requirements. And so, in some ways, again, just we're trying to figure out what are the ways we can incentivize this sort of education. Not everyone wants to sit through a human trafficking seminar or training, even if they need to, but at least it gives a little bit of a perk there. And so, in doing that education, we have trained and equipped school districts with from their teachers, faculty, and staff, and recognizing it in the classroom so that they can help serve the front lines and file a report if they're suspecting something or seeing problematic behavior with one of their students in their classrooms. And then we have also done extensive trainings as well with medical professionals and have worked with universities such as Messiah University, where we just recently completed a training with some of their graduate and undergraduate students who are serving in the medical field, training them up, as well as others who maybe are actively placed in some of their residency programs, as we just spoke to some psychiatric residents last night who are in their process of their first or second year in their residency programming to receive their doctorates. And so working to give them that training as well from the medical field perspective, as some of those signs and things they can do look just a little bit different. So we tweak our training we can offer to them then.
Yeah, Jen Spry, I'm hoping to have her on again. She is a survivor herself
Mhm.
who
Yep.
she's a nurse and she's very passionate about this as well. And she knows that this needs to be out there within the medical community because
Mhm.
You don't, just like we didn't know about Carlisle until you had the trip
Yeah.
to Thessaloniki. The that kind of stuff. Uh, it's nice that we can be responsive to it and get that
Mhm.
information out. So I appreciate what you're doing with that home that you're building, that
Mhm.
restoration place. Uh, could you talk a little bit about that? That project has been
Mhm.
really progressing, and
Has been.
like you to go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I noted, we do quite a bit of work in education, but on the flip side of it, as people become aware and as we see more reports coming forward, there naturally becomes a dilemma of what happens to a survivor once they are identified and or potentially they come forward and they self-report. What happens from there? And I think something to note with human trafficking, and Senator Dush, I know you know this very well, but for our viewers, is that this is a crime that is completely stripping a person of their human dignity. And it is, in many ways, communicating to them that they are less valuable than even the products we buy. I
They
know
are
we
a
see a
product.
lot. They are. But I think even too, as we see the slogans of people are not for sale, people are not products. I was thinking about this recently of the thought of when we buy something, even for $1, we take a little bit of care of it. We don't want to destroy it right out of the gate. That's typically seen as pretty odd to buy something and then immediately destroy it, even if it's $1 or 25 cents. There's a level of value there. But something that I find very interesting for survivors is that even though they're technically being purchased and treated as products, there is no care being taken for them. It does not matter to a trafficker if they die. It doesn't matter the abuse that they're incurring by a client, whether it's through those fantasies that they're trying to play out that get very violent and difficult. And so with that though, it's very it's just very much against our human nature in some ways. Just all of it is twisted, where when you buy something, you usually take care of it. And even in this instance, they're technically buying something, but there is absolutely no care being taken for the individuals being bought and sold. And so with that, we're talking individuals who maybe are being purchased by a family member, or they're being trafficked by a romantic partner or somebody that they've known and trusted. A lot of times that's typically who the trafficker is somebody they know, and then they're being sold over and over and over again. So I say all of this in my response for the restoration home because this isn't like a quick fix that just happens for a person where they leave their trafficker and then suddenly, life is all better and they're ready to move into their apartment and start a job. We are rebuilding the identity of a person. We are starting over, and we're teaching that person that they matter, and we're telling them and showing them that they are seen and that they're heard. And from there we're trying to help them piece together the many broken pieces of their lives. And so that's not going to happen in a quick fix program. And so with that, it is a long and it's a slow journey to healing. And we know that we can't partner forever with survivors. There's an element where eventually there has to be some form of graduation that takes place. But what we've committed to is that we want to provide at least a year to 18 months of restorative housing, where for us, we specialize in sex trafficking and we'll be housing females. But that does not mean that human trafficking doesn't also happen to men or children. This is just the area in which we're serving in right now. And our desire is to be able to provide safe housing, meet basic needs, where we have all of those basic needs covered, so then they can start to focus on healing. And so our desire and our dream is to then be able to help them understand and comprehend the trauma that's occurred, to heal from that, and from there start to dream again and have that the possibilities to be able to seek a job opportunity that they've always wanted to do, or to be able to move into the location that they've desired to live in. And so our intent from the very start is, how are we setting up our residents for a life of independence, but one that's sustainable too, and is going to help them be able to pay for the ongoing care and needs that they're going to have. And so the home is really like a year to 18 months of kind of the way we picture it as parenting, where we don't have 18 years with
No,
these residents, but we're equipping them for that life of independence and really, really setting that healthy foundation, providing them with a support network with our trusted agencies that we collaborate with and church partners and volunteers so that they have a sense of community even outside of the restoration home that's setting them up for success beyond. And so this is the very first home of its kind in the Harrisburg region. So there is a home very similar to this within about an hour's drive. But to put it into perspective, we're dealing with hundreds of cases just in our area, or hundreds of victims, I should say, in our
yeah.
area. And housing is very limited. We can house 6 women at a time to be able to provide that individualized sort of care, but the need is great. There is a very significant need in Pennsylvania for aftercare services for survivors.
And one of the things that I want to make sure that we stay away from is the government coming in and trying to take over and do all this. Because
Yeah.
from a state level or a national level,
Yep.
uh, you know as well as I do that the people who are the most responsive are the people who are in it because they've got a
Yeah.
passion.
Yep.
And you don't see that in government bureaucrats. I'm sorry to say, you just don't.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, and one of the things as you were talking about the survivors, well, the victims at the time being bought and sold,
Yeah.
I got the image of, the old saying that when you got a rental car, drive it like you stole it,
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah.
And they're not actually being bought; they're being rented out by somebody who
Yeah.
owns them, and that is so
Yeah.
demeaning
Yeah.
and so it's dehumanizing in a way that most people can never understand.
Mhm.
The survivors that I've been blessed to be able to spend some time with, man, my heart just, and I know yours does too, it
Yeah.
just breaks for them. In fact, why don't we, did you help with the Tom Coates testifier, the young girl who had been trafficked at that one seminar that I was able to attend? Were you
Oh,
part of
yeah.
that?
Yes, I was part of that event. That was not a survivor we've worked with, but yes, we were present at that event.
That one, uh, yeah, she was a local girl from down there, and
Yep.
she was trafficked across state lines. And do you have one of the stories that you can share? I mean, you don't have to get into who it was, but just to
Yeah.
give our listeners, the people
Mhm.
watching, an idea of
Yep.
what you're dealing with.
Absolutely. And I think so the story, this is one that I often share in our seminars just because I think it helps us to understand how in plain sight it really is. And so there are so many different examples that could be shared, but I'll share this one in particular because I think it really does drive that home of it just hiding in plain sight. So back when Greenlight Operation was getting started, we were doing a lot of speaking in different churches, and so there was a church that I was speaking in. It was with a college group, and so there were a lot of young people present that night in their early 20s or so. And so we're talking about here's what human trafficking is, tying it in with their sermon series that they were going through. And at the end of this, as we concluded, and I had taken some time to share about Greenlight and just what human trafficking looks like, but ways that they could all get involved. And at the end of this, you're visiting, you're talking with people there, and there was a young woman who came up and she said, "You just explained my relationship." And I remember just thinking for a moment, wait a minute. And so I asked her, I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, I'm being trafficked." And I remember just in that moment, even as much as you do the trainings and everything else, and mind you, this was very early on in my career in this as well. But I just asked her, I said, "Are you safe right now?" And and she said, "No, I'm not." She said, "My boyfriend is right over there and he's the one who's doing it to me." And here he was, in a church setting, in a very safe church that we'd been in, and it's in a nice area and everything else. And here is this young couple. She was being sold by her boyfriend, and there he was hanging out with a group of guys, and they're all laughing and they have no idea what is happening behind the scenes. And so we were able to have a quick interaction so that we could meet up at a time and location that was safe for her. And we did get to do that. And followed through, of course, on our next steps at her direction, because we also want to ask a victim if, reporting is something they want to do. What do they feel comfortable with? And but yeah, right there, we had a situation in which this man was selling her. It had started with her dancing in the strip clubs, and at the time that was the income that she wanted. It was the cash, it was quick cash. But then when she wanted to leave and wasn't allowed to, and it started to intensify, where it wasn't then just happening in the strip clubs, but she was being sold at house parties. She was being sold through pornography online and a variety of other ways, and being just exploited in just one of the most horrific ways by a person that was supposed to be a romantic partner, somebody who was, loving her, and that companionship. And it was completely distorted. And so she was being abused locally in our region. And, here she was right in front of us. And, she wasn't locked and chained away. She wasn't hidden. And she was doing life in plain sight, but she hadn't spoken up for many years because of the shame that she felt. She was embarrassed, and she didn't know that what was happening to her was called human trafficking. And so there's an element with our education in which it's not uncommon for us to have similar instances like that, where somebody comes forward and says, I didn't realize that I was being trafficked, and that this is actually considered human trafficking. And then we work to get them the help that they're looking for.
I appreciate that, and we've got, I know, you have siblings trafficking their siblings. You have
Oh, yeah.
parents, unfortunately, trafficking
Yeah.
their kids for drugs or money, whatever.
Mhm.
It's not just like you were working on in an earlier life with the international trafficking or that sort of thing, but this happens even within a home, and
Mhm. Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah.
Now, you've done some work with law enforcement as well. Do you want to explain how you inform the different law enforcement agencies on how to deal with the the victims at that
Mhm.
time? I know you have your thing is victim centered, trauma informed with the
Yep.
police,
Mhm.
and you want to go into how you go through that training?
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout Pennsylvania, and Senator Dash, I know you know this as well, but it was eye-opening for us as we were working in human trafficking and starting to go outside of even our region. But of course, first starting in our area and trying to understand, how prevalent is human trafficking here? What are police, what is their response, and what does this look like? So as we started prodding and asking these questions, we quickly learned that very little training had been done for a lot of our law enforcement officials in understanding what human trafficking looks like, and beyond that, just what to simply look for in the indicators of human trafficking, but also how to properly, handle yourself in a situation where you're working with a survivor. Um, and so we still encounter counties and regions where they have not completed trainings on human trafficking, and they'll say, well, we have 0 cases here. My question is, okay, you have 0 reported. What is your anti-human trafficking response? And they're like, well, what do you mean? Well, what are you guys doing to find it and to help innovate? Well, nothing. We've never been trained on it. And I said, well, exactly. So that's why you have 0 cases. It's not that it's not there. You just haven't
Right,
done a training on it. So what we'll do is we'll go and we'll assess what kind of training have they already received, and from there we'll build upon it. So it might look like if they're wanting to take an approach where they do more sting operations, we'll talk about the codes enforcement. We'll discuss the different strategies that can be taken, especially too if they do a sting operation and then they have survivors that are being brought in. How can we connect with those individuals without them feeling like they're just getting thrown around and once again, we're not giving them choice in things. We're not valuing them, but just treating them like another stepping stool for what the ultimate goal is. But how can we, from that moment of interaction with a law enforcement officer, start building that trust and connection? And so we've worked with a variety of agencies. We've also had others who are starting to notice the work that's being done in central Pennsylvania and wanting to replicate that in other regions. And so we have been very blessed in Dauphin County to have a phenomenal human trafficking task force. And we love working with their leadership. They went through a couple of years of going through in-depth human trafficking trainings, especially for their investigators. And so when they started their task force, there were 3 active cases of human trafficking in Dauphin County. We're talking the capital region of our state, and only
Right.
3 active cases noted at that time. To now there are over 140 active cases, and some of those cases can have multiple victims. So that even there just goes to show the power of education, especially for law enforcement, whether it's how to spot it when they're doing a traffic stop for a speeding ticket, or how to spot it when they're doing codes enforcement, or maybe they get called in for a domestic violence situation. How can we look a little bit further and see, is there maybe more to this than what is immediately meeting the eye? So yeah, lots of collaboration. We of course work to build trust with our police. Our intent is not to go in and point fingers and say, hey, you're doing a terrible job, but it's instead, okay, here's the reality of where we are. No trainings happen. Let's build upon that. And so how can we help you do that and accomplish that together? And that's really our heart and desire in the process.
And just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not going on.
Absolutely.
The shame and everything that the victim is feeling, the victim's motivated to hide it. Of course,
Mhm.
the person that's engaged in the criminal activity has a motive to hide it,
Mhm.
and that includes the buyers.
Yep.
So it's once you get it out there and get it known. I'm blessed in Jefferson County. We've actually gotten more people incarcerated per capita than any other county in the
Wow.
state, and it's because our district attorney and our judge take sexual abuse of minors and others very seriously, whether it's
Good. Good.
human trafficking or whatever. So we're I'm very blessed to have that team here, and as well as our state police and local law enforcement. They're very active with it. But that's the dichotomy. You go from not knowing to when you start
Mhm.
actually getting involved and starting to prosecute. And when you do it in a way, all right, the people who are in what they call inside the life,
Mhm.
uh, it takes many times with encounters with law enforcement,
Mhm.
carrying nursing professionals, whoever, before they actually decide that they're going to seek help.
Yeah.
And that can also be a blessing in that, if law enforcement are properly trained, that distrust that the trafficker is sowing with the person, with the person that they're trafficking, saying, you can't trust the police,
Mhm. Yep.
they're going to lock you up. And we're working on changing that. Thank you
Yeah.
for legislatively, we're working on
Yep.
changing some of that stuff. But uh, that relationship, and when the police officers are doing the things that you and David Cox with Zoe International,
Mhm.
training those law enforcement officers, all of a sudden gradually there becomes a level of trust there, to the point where when that person is, some sort of an event that's high trauma or high emotion, brought the
Mhm.
police officers there, and that just might be the motivation to, at that right moment, where
Yep.
that person who's a victim takes the first step to becoming a survivor.
Yeah.
And
It's very true. Yeah, they say it takes about 7 points of interaction. And so, yeah, to make sure that those interactions continue to be positive and, they're seeing a way forward. You're absolutely right. It makes a world of difference.
let's talk about the trauma bond for a minute.
Mhm.
uh, your thing with law enforcement is the second part of it's trauma informed.
Mhm.
Can you let folks know how important
Mm.
understanding that trauma bond between the trafficker and the person being trafficked is?
Yeah, so with that, and then that can be part of the reason why it's difficult for a survivor to want to leave because there is a bond that's happened. There's some Stockholm syndrome. So we've got to consider the fact again of who is a trafficker. So is the trafficker a caregiver? Is it a family member? You've got familial ties there to between the victim and the perpetrator. If we're talking again about a romantic partner, we're once again then dealing with maybe that person is more fearful of being alone than they are, in being exploited. So there's an element where maybe there's still some good that they still see in their trafficker, or they hold on to maybe some of the initial grooming stage that took place, and they believe that, but things really aren't improving. And that can be what happens when you're living in trauma and you're in a survival mode for a very long period of time is judgment centers get very blurred. And we have a heart of compassion toward that because there are some very strong connections then between the victim and the trafficker that can be present and make it very challenging then for a person to want to leave that individual and get the healing and care needed. But that too is why healing is so important for an extended period of time under professional care, because in a 30 to 60-day program, and these are very important programs for the initial meeting and assessing and dealing with those immediate needs. But if there isn't a longer road of recovery where they have access to professional care, that's where you're typically going to start to see a lapse or somebody going back to their trafficker, because we haven't dealt with some of the root issues. We haven't worked through that trauma and the trauma bonding, or some of the classes as we connect with other shelters and agencies. Some of the classes that survivors are most excited about, and I should say for sex trafficked victims, because it's a little bit different for labor trafficking, are things like healthy relationships and boundaries in relationships and things like that, because to them that is something that they're eager to learn more about, because that hasn't been modeled for many years for some. So yeah, the trauma bond is huge. And then when we talk about taking a trauma informed approach, ultimately what we're trying to do throughout the whole process is we're engaging with those survivors is we want to give them as much choice as possible and engage them in their recovery process or in the moment that we have with them. Maybe that's reporting and we're engaging and we're giving them that choice. But ultimately, what we're trying to do more than anything is not unintentionally re-traumatize them in the process of the care we're trying to offer. And so what this might look like with police, for example, in that quick interaction is maybe we've had a huge win and yay, there's a sting operation that's happened. But then if we're ushering them into a dark, cold, very sterile type room, and we're not offering them things like food and not offering, something warm like a blanket or something like that, we're going in and we've got that cold, sterile environment and we're just firing off a bunch of questions to them. We haven't even taken a moment to ask them, how are you doing? Can I get you anything? Is there, how do you feel about being right here right now? Are you doing okay? There are some elements we know legally we can't always like give them the choice of whether or not they're going to get interviewed. We understand that. But to the best of our ability and what they're able to have choice in, providing that and treating them like humans in the process. I
Yes.
think we can get so focused in the systems and structures on quickly getting to the end goal that we then hurt the person. And then that builds up those walls even further of like, next time they think about engaging with a police officer, did the police officer harm them? Did the police officer traffic them? No. But to them, that police officer didn't care about them as a person. And so are they going to go to that person? Are they going to go to an officer again when they need help? Or if something comes forward in their case, are they going to be willing to share that? So it's kind of, how can we help with that? And that's just, again, an example for with police, but with the restorative care, it looks very different too. So,
Yeah, you look at an interview room for somebody who's a suspect.
Mhm.
you want that sterile environment. But when you're dealing with the child advocacy centers are a great example. When
Yeah.
the children of sex abuse, they're taken to a home or someplace that usually has some little children's stuff or the cartoons up on the wall,
Mhm.
things like that. Even the exam rooms where they're doing
Yeah.
the
Yep.
medical examinations. Uh, we need, when we're dealing with somebody who is a victim, they're not in this willingly. They may have been
No.
tricked into it and think that they're into it
Yeah.
willingly, but nobody really becomes involved with this of their own volition.
Mhm.
And in fact, on that note, do you want to talk about grooming and how this uh,
Mhm.
the process that the traffickers will use in order to maybe convince somebody that they are there willing?
Yeah. So yeah, with grooming, what that can look like is we all have basic needs as a human being. So some of us might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These are things like what you might need to survive. So food, shelter, your clothing. But then as you progress, we all have needs, whether that's having a sense of belonging or feeling, that love and all of that. And so a trafficker, ultimately, what they're trying to do in their recruitment and grooming process is they are looking for vulnerabilities that a person has. And so you could have different risk factors that might make somebody vulnerable. Those could be things like a person who's living in poverty, maybe they've recently relocated, or they're runaway youth, or they're utilizing substances, or maybe their caregiver is. These are all things that could be the risk factors. And so essentially then, if somebody has a window of vulnerability in their life, a trafficker they are what we call master manipulators. They can pick up on that vulnerability very easily. And so they will then work to prey upon that. And so what we have to keep in mind is a trafficker is trying to make as much money as possible. They don't want to be recognized. And so if they can manipulate somebody to get what they want, and they can do it well without a person raising the alarm, well, then they're getting what they want. And so we're looking at instances where a person is being groomed, whether that is maybe they're having their basic needs met and they're offered a place to live, and they're told, hey, you can live here. I know you were about to be evicted from your apartment. Times are tough. Don't worry, come and stay. And then suddenly that person a few weeks later has to pay $500 for their free stay that they were supposed to have. Well, obviously they don't have the money for that. And then suddenly, well, hey, you can pay another way. And here's how you're going to do that. Or grooming could look like elaborate gifts and trips and things like that. Maybe that speaks more to the person they're trying to victimize. And so traffickers will follow through. Those first during that grooming phase, they're following through. They are the kindest person. They're nice. They're giving nice gifts. They're giving the best potential job that a person can have. And then they bait the person through that. They're isolating them in the process, and then they start to it might start small. They're asking little things of this individual until it grows bigger and bigger, and then they might use things like blackmail, threats, violence, and that person is then under the control of that trafficker. Now for youth, it happens much more quickly. And you've got the whole online component we haven't really touched on either, where trafficking can happen online very, very quickly, where a child will send maybe a photo or a video that's requested of them. And, because they're getting pressured, they're not really thinking through it. They send it, and then immediately they have regrets. They want it back. And then the trafficker is not returning that, or starts to threaten them in other ways. And so then again, they will control them by maybe saying they'll post that to their parents' page, or they'll send it to their school. But youth, they don't know how to process that. And so that's why we're also seeing an increase in suicide rates with minors who are being, we call it sextortion if something like that has gone out there. And we know that it's child sexual abuse material that is being produced and sent out. And so these are things that um, a child doesn't know how to process that and that panic that they're feeling. And so, that grooming process might be shorter, but it's also they're running through their emotions much more rampantly than maybe we'd see in the adult population too.
Yeah, when the hormones and stuff are going, and then you get somebody that's maybe moved, a kid
Yeah.
that's moved into a new school district or whatever. The traffickers pick up on that sense of loneliness or whatever.
Yes.
They
Yep.
think they're involved with some sort of an online relationship with somebody who really cares about them.
Hmm.
But here in the last couple of weeks, we had a young boy here, I think in Pennsylvania. I think he was in Pennsylvania, but the parents were just stunned that he ended up committing suicide because he wasn't going to comply apparently with
Yeah.
what the trafficker wanted, but also didn't want to the
Yeah.
face his parents, face his church, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's boys and girls, and
Oh yeah.
it's these groomers. They don't have a heart about that. That's not
No.
the fact that that boy committed suicide means nothing to the trafficker.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I lost a potential sale or a contract or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but again, the victims are commodities to the
Yeah.
traffickers. And one of the things that was really eye-opening to me down at the Just conference here about a year and a half ago,
Mm.
uh, when they were talking about the difference in the mindset or the change in the mindset of some of the organized crimes, the people who were trafficking in narcotics have now realized. You were talking about the safety for the trafficker. I mean, they've got a way to be a little bit disconnected from it. They're not holding the product,
Hmm.
but they are controlling the product.
Yeah.
And not only that, uh, it's a whole lot easier to go out and groom and lure in some young person or whatever,
Yeah.
or pick somebody up off the street, and then you're using that individual over and over and over again, selling the same product
Mhm.
uh, or renting the same product without having the risk that the narcotics folks do.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true because a person too can be used over and over again, unlike a product or a substance. And yeah, it's horrific.
I want to thank you. I mentioned Senate Bills 44 and 45 earlier. Uh, your contacts with organizations around the Commonwealth actually truly helped us to get that across the line. I mean, your people, organizations that are involved with this, were reaching out to legislators, and it was a big help.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for that. But what are some of the other pieces of legislation that you would like to see?
Yeah. So on our end, and we love those victories and it's so exciting. And it truly is a collective effort. So thank you for taking point on that and using your seat of leadership there to really move that forward because it's a victory for all of us. And
I've done
so
about you guys though, Jordan. This was a big team effort
it is.
through so many different individuals and organizations. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate the but
It
what do you
is. It's a
have for the future?
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a collective effort. And so on our end, some things that we're turning our attention to and really trying to listen to survivors as well as other agencies and really walk the balance on some stuff. So we are dealing still with some challenges on what is called vacatur law. And I know a lot of people, you say that and they look at you like, oh my goodness, what is this? But essentially, what we see as a major barrier and has been communicated by many survivors as a barrier once they have gone through healing and recovery. they are facing the challenges of employment, and a lot of them have criminal records from their time of while they were being exploited, and so we have to keep in mind, like, a trafficker is exploiting their victims in any and every possible way they can. So if they are going to keep their hands clean as much as possible, and they're going to make those that they are controlling and already abusing do the dirty work. And so that might include things like credit card fraud. It might include shoplifting. It may include different schemes that their trafficker is also participating in. And so there are a variety of crimes that many victims will be typically, and this is where the police training is also very important, where some of those crimes might get noticed over the trafficking to start. And so they will start getting this criminal record while they're being actively exploited. And then that serves as a major barrier for housing. It serves as a major barrier for jobs and everything else. So Green Light Operation, along with many others throughout the state, are really wanting to see more legislation moving forward to help with the expungement of those criminal records
Yes,
for survivors. So
I
that's
can
a
tell
really
you
big one.
that one's actually right at the top of our list.
That's wonderful.
When, you know, if the girl's not producing enough money
Yep.
for the trafficker, they've got to make it up someplace else.
Yeah.
That's the way the trafficker sees it. And
Hmm.
they're being forced into doing these other
Hmm.
types of crime if they're not bringing in enough money on a given day.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's absolutely true. And so and then another one that we're looking at, and this is where, we're trying to whack that balance and figure out what is our best approach forward here. We are dealing with so many cases involving illicit massage businesses. And a challenge we are facing is you will have so many resources that are poured into a law enforcement sting operation or something along those lines, or a concerned citizen will call it in, and you'll have people that are extracted from this, and it is recognized that this is a place that is a storefront for human trafficking, essentially. And what happens, usually within about a week, it opens right back up. Or that business will relocate, but they'll jump to a different county, or they'll just go somewhere else. And so it's not really striking at the root of the issue there. And so we're trying to find a way of how can we balance not restricting our legitimate massage and spa businesses, but also how can we further penalize those who are, using the loopholes in this system for the illicit massage businesses. And more often than not, these particular ones are linked to organized crime. So
yeah,
even the people that are getting found and the storefronts that are getting shut down, they are near the bottom of the totem pole in the grand scheme of the criminal activity that's happening. But we also want to say that Pennsylvania is not a place that is hospitable to this kind of business. And so
absolutely.
really trying to find how can we stop them from utilizing the legal loopholes they currently are, because it's thriving. We are a state that, and so many states do have it, but we are in a region that's thriving. But we've been watching some counties, like Berks County, for example, they started creating county ordinances for these sort of businesses. But the challenge with that is it's great for Berks County, but it's not solving the problem statewide. And
Right.
so those could be things like the hours of operation, lighting, things like that. But that's not really what we're wanting to get too fixated on, is the nitty gritty of it. But we're mostly looking at how can we legislatively solve this in some capacities to help close those loopholes that criminals are utilizing. So that's a big one. And then the other is we're part of some other legislative work groups. We're looking at some of the barriers for survivors as well, pertaining to adult survivors, are things like their driver's licenses. If those have been suspended or removed from them, it is very, very challenging right now for them to be able to get a driver's license. Renewed and brought back in, which obviously they need for their income and housing and all sorts of things. So there is no shortage of challenges or things that we would want to help conquer, but those are a few of those top priorities that we are keeping our eye on right now and wanting to help see push forward.
Yeah, when I was down for Tom Kutz's seminar, that they had just shut down a massage parlor,
Yep.
and it had been about 2 weeks prior, and the massage parlor was open again. They said that the
Yeah.
people that were down there came from Flatbush up in New York,
Mhm.
New York City. They already knew where they were coming from.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and apparently they did something like change the name of the company, or
Yeah.
the ownership name of the company.
Mhm.
Kept the name of the out on the storefront, but
Yeah,
it was
it was. We were part of helping with victim services that day, and so we had taken point on bringing in other nonprofits to help with the funneling of during that sting operation, and so we got to see it, boots on the ground, and it was incredibly disheartening to know the amount of work that law enforcement partners locally at a state level and federally had been doing for, and I can share some of this now because it has hit the news and other things it's been publicly shared about. But we're talking months and some over a year of prep work for this, only for, there were about 12 of these businesses that were busted in this tri-county sting operation. And you're absolutely right, only for them to either open right back up or get a new name, and there was surveillance showing that vanfuls of women were coming right back in, just days later, which is telling us too penalties are not severe enough to deter them from doing what they're doing. So yeah, there's a lot to look at and pick apart in some of these instances.
some of the, that the disheartening part of that is, well, first of all, that just highlights the fact that on this type of operation, it is organized crime.
Hmm.
Uh, it
Yeah.
highlights the fact that, as you said, we don't have the proper legislative tools and punishments available. Uh, and what's stunning about that is that across all three counties, they had enough people, enough victims ready to go to come be bringing it down there and reopening.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, that just breaks my heart because what these women are going through is literally hell on earth. And
Yeah.
they even if they don't realize it, uh, it's it's just totally disheartening.
It is. Yeah.
And this is one area that I'm definitely on board with
Yeah.
trying to get
We're grateful.
things going. And your relationship with the state police
Mhm.
task force, and the fact that one of the nice things is the folks that we're taking or we've taken to get the task force spun up within the Attorney General's office,
Yeah,
they are from the organized crime
they
section.
are. Yep.
So that, but they're going to be dealing with all, it's not just going to be the organized crime portion of it,
Mhm.
but they are going to be hitting this and hitting it hard.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful. We just need to take some of the information that they are learning, as well
Mhm.
as what you guys have done and what you learned from the things like that sting operation, so that we can get the proper legislation in place in order to help make that happen.
Yeah,
And
it's a team effort. That's for
yeah,
sure.
and I agree with you about the driver's license thing. I mean, when we've got
Mhm.
constituents coming into the office all the time about just regular things like what
Yeah,
a DUI or something like that, where they've lost
yeah,
their license, and it's a nightmare trying to get my team just trying to get their driver's licenses back
yeah,
in the
yeah,
best of cases.
yep.
Unfortunately, these victims, they're when they become survivors and they need that driver's license to get their life back in order, it's uh, very, very difficult.
Yes.
Uh, we're about at the time limit, and what I want to
Mhm.
do, first of all, I'm going to put a link whenever we post this to your annual report. It's
Oh,
very
thank you.
informative, and just to let people know the type of organization that you've got,
Mhm.
and if there's anybody out there looking to uh, do something locally within their county or their city or their town. Uh, you have been very helpful to an awful lot of organizations, and you also know people, like I said, across the Commonwealth, and you'll be able to help them, maybe somebody within their region,
Mhm.
to be able to do that. But if you want to, do you want to let folks know how to get a hold of you if they have
Sure.
questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thank you for linking the annual report. So, if you do if you're listening and you do have questions, you can contact us through our website greenlightoperation.org. We do have a contact form you can fill out there. We're also active on social media, so we're on Facebook as well as Instagram. If you're just wanting to learn more about Greenlight Operation, or maybe you do have questions on ways to get involved, but our heart and what we do, from the educating about trafficking, or maybe you're wanting to respond in your local community, we would be happy to share, the things that we have learned in the process. Maybe you're saying, I want to start a home in my region, and I want to help serve in that capacity. I get it. I get what it feels like to feel like you're building an ark in the desert and you're wondering, people are wondering, what is this? When is it opening? What's going on? And sometimes you do seem like the crazy person doing it, but then it all starts to make sense. But we'd be happy to share about our journey there, and our heart, even when our home is open, is how can we help others follow a similar model and open in their regions as well. We want to share that knowledge. So please, our website has a lot of information, and again, social media is a great way to stay in touch as well.
It is. We'll put a link to that as well on here. And I'd also encourage police, nurses, and educators, if you've got uh, any interest at all. Project Greenlight is a great resource, and they have the ability to, like I said, if you want to give the teachers or nurses that something they've got to do a CEU on something again. They've already
Yep.
done it before. But if you want the credit for something else that perhaps you weren't aware of, this is a great opportunity. And you know what? You may very well be someone who is there for somebody that's going through this living hell,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
be able to provide a way out. So, and you'll be equipped with what you need to know in order to help take the first steps.
Yeah.
Jordan, before we leave, one of the things I want to touch on is I've seen over and over again the organizations that are successful uh, have a faith-based component to that. Do you want to
Mhm.
touch on what you've seen when your victims, what is it that helps them find a way to get out? What are the ways?
Yeah, so for us, we are a Christ-centered organization. God's at the center of all that we do, and so for us, it is certainly not a requirement for a person to be a Christian to come to our program. In fact, we anticipate many will not be, or maybe have been hurt by religion and church. And it's also not a requirement for them to graduate and to have converted. Again, that wouldn't play into our trauma-informed care, but in all that we do, and the way we conduct ourselves, and in the framework of all in which we act as a staff and a team, it's through our belief in Jesus. And so our hope is that for those that are hurting and broken, that they will really get to see and know who the true healer is, and know that religion or God is not maybe what was put upon them in during their time of abuse, where maybe that was being manipulated, or a false picture was painted for them of that. So our hope is that, through the work that we do in our actions and through our words, that people would know the importance of Jesus and his redeeming qualities. So
Well, it's that redemption that the light that shines out of the people who belong to Jesus
yeah.
is something that people become attracted to when somebody's a true follower of Christ. That light that comes from their eyes, their lives, and the way that they
Mhm.
deal with loving their neighbor as Christ
Yeah.
loved the church in a
Yeah.
sacrificial way. So I'm very grateful for your testimony and for the way that you help those folks. And
Thank you.
again, it's Jesus that shines through and is
Mhm. Yeah.
part of the reason you're so very successful.
Absolutely. Yep. He is so good to us. He really is.